Welcome to this deep study. Today, we're looking at source material that really asks us to, well, throw out the standard 5,000-year timeline for civilization.
Yeah, it's a total shift in perspective, isn't it?
Definitely. We're going way beyond Sumer, beyond Egypt, really diving into what some deep historical sources, especially comparing scripture and myth, suggest about history. Well, before history as we know it.
Exactly. The standard narrative always starts around, 5,000, maybe 6,000 years ago. Sumer, Egypt, that's kind of the beginning.
Right.
But the insights we're exploring today, particularly looking at the Bible alongside, say, Hindu cosmology or Greek myths, they all point to a much older cyclical history. It's fascinating.
So if Adam and, Sumer, that's just the latest chapter.
Yeah.
What came before? What are these earlier ages?
Well, the material Paul Sandhu lays out describes this really clear progression, 4 main ages. And you see echoes of this everywhere. The yugas in Hinduism, Plato's ages, even the structure in the book of Daniel. It goes golden, silver, bronze, and then our current age, the Iron Age. And the implication is just huge. It suggests advanced civilizations existed, thrived, and were completely wiped out long before Adam.
Wiped out, so not just faded away.
Utterly destroyed. And these ages, they could have lasted, potentially millions of years.
Millions, wow. So we're not picturing like primitive tribes here. We're talking potentially sophisticated worlds.
That's exactly it. Highly advanced, maybe even technologically beyond us in some ways. So our study today is really twofold. First, figure out what happened, what destroyed these worlds.
Okay.
And second, maybe more importantly, why did it happen? What does this incredibly long, destructive history tell us about where evil came from and maybe what its purpose is, if you can even say that?
Right, the big why. Okay, let's start digging. Where do we begin tracing this vast history?
We have to start with Genesis, right? Chapter 1. Most people read verse 1 and verse 2 as happening, one right after the other, part of the 6 days.
In the beginning, God created, and then the earth was without form and void. Yeah, it seems consecutive.
But the argument here is that there's a massive gap between those two verses. Not a theory. Paul calls it the Gap Fact.
A gap fact. Why so definitive? Because skipping that gap creates problems.
Huge problems. You hit an immediate contradiction if you read them back to back. Think about it. How could God create the earth perfectly in one moment?
Okay.
Only for it to be described as a complete ruin, a wasteland in the very next breath. It just doesn't track.
Okay, let's break down the language then, like the source does.
Yeah.
Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. That word created must be key.
It's absolutely crucial. The Hebrew word is bara. That's Strong's H1354 if you're looking it up. And it doesn't just mean make. It means to shape, to form, to bring into existence in a state of perfection and completion.
So when God breathes something, it's finished, it's perfect.
Exactly. It's established. Well, think about passages like Job 38 or Proverbs 8. They talk about God laying the foundation, setting the measures, creating with wisdom. It was perfect. The sources even suggest the inhabitants back then, angels, maybe pre-Adamic sons of God, they were delighted. Creation was pronounced good. It was pristine, stable.
Okay, that paints a very different picture of verse 1.
Mm-hmm.
A complete, perfect world. But then how do we deal with verse 2? The earth was without form and void. Many people interpret that as just raw materials, right? Like clay waiting to be shaped, not necessarily destroyed.
Right. That's the common counter-argument. But again, it comes down to the specific Hebrew words used in verse 2. The earth is described as tohu and vohu.
Tohu and vohu.
Yeah, tohu, that's H8414. It doesn't mean unorganized. Look at its usage elsewhere. It means confusion, emptiness, ruin, wasteland, even unreality.
Wasteland. Okay.
And vohu, H922, means void, empty, waste. So when you put them together, tohu vo, it's not describing raw potential, it's describing utter desolation, chaos, ruin.
So is verse 1 is bara, perfect creation, and verse 2 is tohu vohu, desolate ruin.
It's impossible for them to describe the same moment or even consecutive moments in a simple creation process. God didn't create perfection as ruin. Something catastrophic must have happened between verse 1 and verse 2. The world became tohu vohu. That proves the gap.
And is there other scriptural backing for this idea that God didn't create it as a ruin initially?
Absolutely. This is where it really firms up. Look at Isaiah 45, verse 18. God speaking himself. He says he formed the earth and made it. He established it. He created it not in vain. And the Hebrew word there for in vain is tohu.
The same word as in Genesis 1:2.
The exact same word. God explicitly states, I did not create it tohu. He didn't create it as a wasteland. That directly contradicts the idea that Genesis 1.2 is describing the initial state. It must be describing a state of ruin after the original perfect creation.
Wow. Okay, that Isaiah verse seems pretty definitive. It shifts it from a theory to, well, a gap fact, as Paul calls it.
Exactly. It seals the interpretation based on Scripture itself. God confirms the original creation wasn't chaos.
And do we see this specific state of ruin without form and void described anywhere else? As a result of judgment, maybe?
Yes, and powerfully so.
Yeah.
Jeremiah chapter 4, verses 23 through 26. Jeremiah has this vision, this look back at a devastating judgment, and he says, I beheld the earth, and lo, it was without form and void.
The same phrase again.
Identical tohu vohu. It's not an accident. Jeremiah is describing the aftermath of God's judgment on a previous world. The sources link this directly to the world ruled by Lucifer, which we'll get to.
So Jeremiah gives us a picture of how it became tohu vohu.
He does. He describes mountains trembling, the heavens having no light. He says there was no man, which is incredibly significant.
No man, meaning pre-Adamic humans were wiped out.
Seems to imply that, yes. And he says the fruitful place was a wilderness, and all the cities thereof were broken down at the presence of the Lord and by his fierce anger. It's a picture of total planetary catastrophe caused by divine judgment.
Okay, so that lines up perfectly with Genesis 1.2 being a description of a judged, ruined world covered in water the deep.
Precisely. It connects the dots between the perfect creation, a period of history we don't usually see, a massive judgment, and the resulting ruin described just before the 6 days of recreation for Adam's time.
Now, Genesis 1.2 also mentions darkness was upon the face of the deep. Is that just, no sunlight, or is there more to it?
There's much more to it, and this is where the gap reveals something crucial about the history of evil. The Hebrew word for darkness here is hoshek. That's H2822.
Hoshek.
Yes. And while it can mean physical darkness, its primary figurative meanings are really heavy. It means misery, destruction, death, ignorance, sorrow, and pointedly wickedness, spiritual evil.
Wickedness. So not just the absence of light, but the presence of something actively negative.
Exactly. Think about it. God is light. In him, there is no darkness at all. 1 John 1.5. So if the entire face of the deep is covered in hoshek and overwhelming spiritual darkness and wickedness, what does that tell you?
It tells you evil wasn't just starting. It was already there. Mature.
Rampant. It had reached a state of, you could say, absolute darkness long before God said, let there be light in Genesis 1.3. That command wasn't just about physical light. It was pushing back against this pre-existing immense spiritual darkness.
So the chaos wasn't just geological. It was moral. Spiritual residue from a massive failure.
Precisely. And the proof continues right into the Garden of Eden. Consider the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
Right? It was already there.
It was already fully grown, planted, bearing fruit before Eve was even created. Evil wasn't some new concept Adam had to figure out. It was a pre-existing, fully developed system, a complete curriculum of good and evil, ready and waiting.
That implies evil had a long time to develop in those previous ages.
It had to have. For that tree to represent the full spectrum, evil needed ages to mature, to go through its stages, which we'll explore. It didn't just pop into existence.
And Paul Sandhu connects this ancient pre-Adamic world to, well, things like Atlantis, high technology.
Yeah, the suggestion is that the Golden Age world especially was a kind of wonder world. Technologically far superior to ours in many ways. Think advanced construction, communication, even genetic knowledge.
Genetic knowledge.
Yes. Their downfall wasn't a lack of know-how. It was a moral and spiritual failure. They had immense power, incredible knowledge, but they lacked love, or charity, as the source puts it. And that lack made their power destructive.
Power without love.
Corrupts.
Absolutely. And we still see faint echoes of that power today, don't we? In these impossible megalithic sites.
Like Baalbek.
Exactly. Baalbek in Lebanon. You got foundation stones like the Stone of the South that weigh over 1,000 tons. 1,000 tons. We struggle to move things a fraction of that size today, even with our best technology.
How did they even quarry them, let alone move and place them so precisely?
That's the mystery, isn't it? Or look at Gornaya Shoria in Siberia. Massive granite blocks, some estimated at 3, maybe 4,000 tons, stacked perfectly. This isn't Bronze Age guys with ropes and logs. It's evidence of a technology we just don't understand. So these sites, Baalbek, Ruad, maybe underwater structures.
Yeah.
They're like fingerprints of these lost advanced ages.
That's how the source presents them. Physical remnants, monuments to worlds that achieved incredible technological heights. but ultimately collapsed because they lacked the spiritual foundation. They were wonder worlds, but spiritually bankrupt.
Okay, so we've got these lost ages, ending in ruin described in Genesis 1.2. Now let's get into the why behind that ruin. You mentioned the maturation of evil. The source connects this to three distinct figures across the ages.
Yes, and this is critical. Evil wasn't static, it degenerated. It got progressively worse, moving down the scale of creation, involving three specific fathers or primary figures. They're often conflated, especially in popular theology, but the source argues they are distinct beings representing distinct stages of corruption.
A downward spiral, so not perfected overnight.
Not at all. It went from the highest order spirit, an angel, down through man, the soul, and finally to the lowest, the beast, the body. Understanding this sequence is key to seeing the full picture of evil that Adam eventually faced.
All right, let's start at the top. The Golden Age. The first father of evil, the anointed cherub. Who was he? Where did he come from?
This figure is detailed primarily in Ezekiel 28. His identity is purely angelic, spiritual, a cherubim, one of the highest orders of angels, like a guardian. And importantly, his domain wasn't earth initially. He was on the holy mount of God, walking among the stones of fire. That's celestial language, heaven.
Okay, so a powerful heavenly being created perfect.
Created absolutely perfect, full of wisdom, perfect in beauty, covered in precious stones. God gave him immense status and presumably immense power. He was like the pinnacle of created beings at that time.
So if he starts perfect, what went wrong? What was the specific flaw that led to the first fall?
It boils down to knowledge versus love. He had incredible knowledge, incredible power. But the source emphasizes he lacked a tested, experiential understanding of love, of charity. And the timeless principle kicked in. Power corrupts, especially power wielded by someone driven by knowledge and self-perception rather than by love or dependence on God's character.
So pride.
Exactly. Spiritual pride. Ezekiel says his heart was lifted up because of his beauty. He corrupted his wisdom because of his brightness. He started relying on his own perfection, his own power, instead of God. That internal pride became, as Ezekiel puts it, a destructive fire that came forth from him and consumed him. That was the birth of spiritual evil.
The fall of the highest. Okay, that leads out of the Golden Age.
Yeah.
Then we move into the Silver and Bronze Ages and the second figure, Lucifer. Paul Sandhu argues strongly that Lucifer is not the same being as the anointed cherub. How is that distinction made?
It's a complete shift in context and description. The cherub is dealt with in Ezekiel 28 in that heavenly setting. Lucifer is addressed in Isaiah 14, and the language points squarely to earth.
Oh, so.
Isaiah 14 verses 16 and 17 are incredibly clear. People look at the fallen Lucifer and say, is this the man that made the earth to tremble, that made the world as a wilderness and destroyed the cities thereof?
The man, so Lucifer was human, or at least embodied.
Yes, a man, a king. A pre-Adamic human ruler, one of those powerful sons of God, mentioned in Genesis 6 perhaps, but existing long before Adam's time. So the degeneration is stark. From a pure spirit being, the cherub, down to a physical, powerful human ruler, Lucifer. From spirit to soul.
Okay, a pre-Adamic king. What was his specific sin? If the cherubs was spiritual pride, what drove Lucifer?
Lucifer's sin was rooted in the soul, ambition, greed, the lust for absolute control and power on earth and beyond. He wasn't just content ruling the world he'd apparently already conquered. His ambition was to physically ascend.
Ascend where?
Into heaven. He declares in Isaiah 14, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. The stars of God are often interpreted as angels. He wanted to usurp God's authority, to become like the Most High. It's the ultimate expression of earthly tyranny reaching for divine power. Kingship, empire, commerce, control.
And this ambition led to the catastrophe we talked about earlier, the tohu vohu state, what the source calls Lucifer's flood.
Precisely. His attempt to ascend was met with judgment. God cast him down to the sides of the pit. Isaiah 14 already says he made the world as a wilderness and destroyed its cities. His final act of rebellion seems to have triggered the cataclysm that resulted in the global flood described implicitly in Genesis 1.2.
The one Jeremiah saw and visioned.
Exactly. It wiped the slate clean. The sources, drawing from Peter, even suggest the heavens and the earth which were then perished, implying the destruction might have even affected the immediate celestial neighborhood, leading to the heavens and the earth which are now. It was a total reset.
Wow. Okay, so cherub, spirit, Lucifer, man's soul. That brings us to the third figure, associated with our current Iron Age, Satan. How is he distinct?
Satan is the final step down in the degeneration. He's the serpent in the garden, the dragon in Revelation. He's explicitly identified as neither the original fallen angel nor the human king Lucifer. He represents the lowest order, the beast, the body, the flesh.
A reptilian beast.
That seems to be the implication from the imagery. Serpent, dragon, it completes the fall. Spirit, cherub, soul, Lucifer, body flesh, Satan circuit.
And how did Satan become the embodiment of evil? Was he created evil? The source mentions something about him being manufactured or hybridized.
Yeah, this is a fascinating and dark concept in the material. The idea is that Satan represents absolute evil because he's essentially the culmination, the repository of the previous two falls.
Like a download.
That's a good analogy Paul uses. The anointed cherub, in his spiritual fall, downloaded his corrupted wisdom and pride into Lucifer. Lucifer, the man-king, then took that spiritual corruption, added his own sins of the soul, tyranny, greed, destruction, and passed all of it on, concentrating it into this final entity, Satan.
So Satan inherited the accumulated evil.
Exactly. And this links to the sins of the flesh. When corruption reaches the physical level, it manifests as perversion, lust, and the corruption of life itself. Hybridization, mixing kinds, distorting creation. Satan is called a murderer from the beginning in John 8:44. The suggestion is he didn't have a perfect beginning to fall from like the cherub or even Lucifer. He was perhaps engineered or brought forth in the corrupted Bronze Age, specifically embodying that total accumulated darkness.
Pure darkness, no light. Ready for Adam.
Perfectly engineered, you might say, as the ultimate antagonist for the new creation, man who was himself a creature of both spirit and flesh. Satan represented the full weight of all prior failures.
Okay, that lays out the ages, the falls, the degeneration. Now the monster question. Why? If God knew all this, if he's good, why allow millions of years of this horror, suffering, death, escalating evil?
Yeah, that's the crux, isn't it? Why permit it all? The answer, according to Paul Sandy's interpretation, is that history itself is a divine lesson, a series of revelations necessary to teach created beings something crucial about God they couldn't learn otherwise.
What couldn't they learn?
They understood God's power. The angels in the Golden Age saw creation immense power. They later saw destruction also immense power. But they didn't understand God's character, his heart. Specifically, they didn't understand love.
They knew of it, maybe, but didn't grasp its value.
Exactly. It was theoretical. Remember 1 Corinthians 8. Knowledge puffs up, but charity love edifieth. The cherub had infinite knowledge, immense power, but without tested sacrificial love, that knowledge just fueled pride. It became self-serving. Power, unchecked by love, always becomes destructive. It's a law.
So if God had just instantly zapped the cherub or Lucifer at the first sign of trouble,
The lesson wouldn't have been learned. The remaining angels, future humanity, they'd only understand God's power and severity. Fear, maybe, but not love, not mercy, not the point of it all.
because God's ultimate power isn't just destruction.
Right. His ultimate power is shown in saving and bringing life out of absolute ruin. But that kind of power, that kind of love, can only be truly demonstrated, truly proven, through sacrifice, through experiencing pain and suffering for another.
And the Golden Age, being perfect, didn't allow for that.
It couldn't. It was, in a way, spiritually shallow. No evil, no pain, no death. It meant no real cost, no real choice, no way to truly value goodness, light, or life, because the alternative wasn't known. You need the contrast. You need the darkness to appreciate the light.
So evil had to be allowed to run its course, to reach its absolute worst.
It seems so. It had to reach that point of absolute darkness, Satan, the culmination, so that when God revealed his own absolute light and love, the contrast would be undeniable. The choice, when presented, would be truly meaningful.
It's like God had to let the ultimate test case of power without love play out to destruction.
To prove definitively that his way, the way of sacrificial love, was the only way to wield ultimate power without corruption. It even applies to Christ. Hebrews says he was made perfect through sufferings. Love had to face death and win to prove it was stronger.
Which brings us finally to us, to mankind.
Yeah.
If angels failed through pride and pre-Adamic man failed through tyranny, what was our designated role in all this?
Mankind, Adam's race, was chosen for something unique, to receive the ultimate revelation that God is love. Not just to see it externally like the angels might have.
But to experience it internally.
Exactly, to have love revealed and birthed within us, written on the heart as Jeremiah prophesies. To allow for a truly reciprocal, conscious relationship based on chosen love, not just created perfection.
But to achieve that, we had to face the full test.
We had to. That's why the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was there. It represented the entire curriculum of failure, the spiritual pride of the cherub, the soul sins of Lucifer, the fleshly corruption of Satan. Adam and humanity through him had to be tested against that completed system of evil.
A test the higher beings had already failed.
So that through the process of failure, redemption, and ultimately receiving God's Spirit, humanity could be perfected in love, proving that love, empowered by God, can handle infinite responsibility without corruption.
So the entire horrifying history, the lost world, the millions of years, it was all setting the stage. Not random chaos, but a necessary foundation.
That's the perspective. A meticulously planned, albeit painful, lesson. The negative had to be fully explored to define the positive. Power without love destroys. Only love can handle power. That's the secret written across the ages.
Okay, wrapping this study up.
Yeah.
We've journeyed way beyond the standard 6,000 years. We've explored this idea of ancient creation, lost gold and silver, bronze ages, seen how evil seemed to degenerate from the highest spirit level down through man to a final beast form.
And hopefully we've seen that maybe it's not just random chaos, maybe there's a purpose behind it all, that history is, as some say, his story, a vast cosmic love story designed to teach and perfect love ultimately in the human heart.
And the core lesson, hammered home by the destruction of those incredibly advanced ancient worlds, from the cherub's fall to Lucifer's, it's that warning about power.
It really is. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. It's like a universal law, with one single exception.
Love.
Love. Tested, proven, sacrificial love. That's presented as the only force in existence capable of wielding infinite power without being destroyed by it or becoming malevolent itself. That's the hard-won lesson of the ages.
Now, this history leaves us with a really provocative final thought to consider, especially about today, our Iron Age. You mentioned the sources, like Jude and 2 Peter, describe the original angels who sinned back then as being currently imprisoned.
Yes. Held in chains of everlasting darkness, awaiting judgment. They seem to be taken off the board, so to speak. And Lucifer's pre-Adamic world was also destroyed, flooded.
Okay, so if those original high-level spiritual entities, the cherubim level, are locked away, and the powerful pre-Adamic human rulers, Lucifer's kind, were wiped out,
Then who, or what, are the legions of disembodied evil spirits and demons that the New Testament and experiences today describe as actively plaguing humanity?
if the spirit level and soul level originators are largely accounted for?
It strongly implies, according to Paul Sandhu's line of reasoning, that the primary source of demonic activity now must be linked to that third level of degeneration, the beast body flesh sins, the corruption and potential hybridization of life that occurred under Satan's influence leading into our age.
So it raises a really unsettling question about the fundamental nature, maybe even the non-human, corrupted biological origin of the spiritual forces we contend with today, something to definitely think more about.